So, welcome. Thanks very much. You're going to hear about me and Blockhouses. And in good African tradition, I'm going to try and weave a story that talks about blockhouses, but it's a metaphor for talking about heritage and the country and a little bit about exploration, because you guys are all explorers. Okay, that. Well, I was in the army for 30 years. Came to South Africa in 2002 as part of the British Army and worked with the SANDF. So that started my connection with South Africa. My connection with South Africa was forged, and I met somebody, and that's how I ended up coming to South Africa. Really, my wife is South African, and my son also dual nationality. I left the army after really a career in communications. So the engineering part you hear about me is not heavy engineering or civil engineering, it's electronics engineering. But I've got an analytical brain, and that's where the engineering part of it comes from in relation to looking at history and looking at the numbers that are associated with history. I moved to South Africa in 2007, so I've been there about 16 years. I came to work for Denel Aerostructures. I made aircraft parts on Atlas Road in Johannesburg for a good while. I then left to work for G4S, security company, one of the largest employers in the world, and the company who screwed up the London Olympics. And as a result of that, thanks very much, I got retrenched. The wrong side of the profit, non-profit, or the operational, non-operating. And then as part of my kind of retrenchment and looking for jobs, continued a passion that I started a little bit before that in researching blockhouses. So I was 2 years at a 2 years at a computer, writing points. My wife dragged me to Karen Wave. So you explorers, when you're exploring and you get a bad back, go to Karen. She is also a body stress release practitioner. And as a result of getting body stress release, I became a practitioner in 2015 and continued my kind of passion for writing books and doing stuff like that. Along came COVID. 2.5 months stuck in the house, me being a creative, it was time to publish. So I cracked on with publishing a book, and in that time, finished one book and published it. It was going to be one book, but split it into two. That's me, really. That's how I've kind of got to where we are today. My passions in life, trust in something bigger than you. So somebody upstairs is looking after me. Have fun, keep learning, empower others, and give back daily. That's the mantra I live life by. And if I don't do it, it's not fun, then I don't do it. I need to press the right buttons here, which is not working very well. Okay, apologies for this. Can't get rid of this. Oh, yes, we can. There we go. No age lives entirely alone. Every civilization is formed not merely by its own achievements, but by what it has inherited from the past. If these things are destroyed, we have lost a part of our past, and we should be the poorer for it. So said a man called Ronald Balfour, who hit the beaches of Dunkirk in 1944 with the sole purpose of recovering all the art and treasure that was looted by Nazi Germany. So he went firking about in the caves of Europe to recover all the treasure. And what have we lost in the past? Well, we don't know. Clearly, we have things like pyramids and Stonehenge and all those kind of relics. But what else was that we've lost? Well, once you've lost it and there's no record, we have no idea. So that's why heritage is important. And it was a rather good book and a quite entertaining film. Yeah, the film was quite good. Had some great characters in it. You can see down there. Some of them look like me, I think. And I put today's flag on because we are at today. That is the flag of today. I could have put flags up of yesterday and all sorts of things of yesterday, but you're going to see that in the presentation and that kind of as we go. So why blockhouses? Well, for me, it started with a Getaway article. You can see the article here. There was an article about Smuts and his roving commando in the latter stages of the war. And there was the Lanesburg Blockhouse, which I'm going to be driving past on Thursday at about 2 o'clock on the way to Cape Town. And you've probably seen it on the way to Cape Town. Just about 20 k's before you get to Lanesburg, there is a blockhouse. And as a result of seeing that article, it just started a little snowball rolling down a hill. And as I started reading on the Boer War, bearing in mind when I started in 2009, knew nothing about the Boer War, everywhere I went had the same stuff written about it. Little chapter, all the famous authors and really accredited historians and academics were writing the same sliver of history. And it seemed that there was something more to it than the sliver of history that we're writing. Nobody had done any analysis. Nobody had said how successful they were. Nobody had said, well, why were they built? And what was the doctrine and what was the purpose of these blockhouses, which you can see on the poster there? Why were they built? So it was time for a fresh eye. And also an explorer's eye and an academic's eye and a military eye tend to tell a different story. And I wanted to tell the story from the military point of view and not from the academic's point of view, which is written with baggage. We all write with baggage at some point, but it's academia has got a specific quite rigid focus to it. Me being an unacclaimed, unattributed author out of the academic system can say what I like because I've got nothing to lose. I've got no career to lose. I've just got books to sell and entertain people about blockhouses. So what stories do they tell is also quite interesting. And in telling the story, I wanted to tell the story through books eventually, because that's where kind of most people, still get their information. Though I do have a website and a Facebook page as well, which is pretty successful. So COVID lockdown came. I'd finished my book, had about 100,000 plus words that I had to trim down. And during lockdown, decided to self-publish. And why self-publish? Well, because no publisher said I would ever sell a book on blockhouses. And I've nearly sold 1,000 books in 2 years. So they were wrong. And all the publishers in the UK were wrong as well. But it's hard work and good fun, self-publishing. So anybody out there wants to self-publish a book and wants any advice, hello, I can give that advice too on self-publishing. It's great fun. You take all the risk and you also take all the reward as well. So I don't want to put my books in exclusive. Every book I put in exclusive, I'll lose 200 rand a book because of the business model. So in my career as well, I've also been known as a creative innovator. So I like to take business models and give them a good old shake and see what comes out. So I've decided not to go the published route. So with all my books, they'll all be self-published because now I've got a market and I've got a niche. You guys are in my niche now because I'm doing a presentation to you. So you'll be on my Facebook pages and stuff like that. And when I come to sell books, I've got 3 is getting there, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8, 9, and 10 are all kind of coming on the way. So I've got a mailing list already. So that's really good.
How many pages?
Sorry?
How many pages?
Pages per book. First one had 315. Second one had 465. Yeah, very readable. Okay, so what is a blockhouse? There are 2 blockhouses. The one you see at the bottom in colour is the Witkop blockhouse by the engine garage on the A59 as you drive towards Reneke, right by the railway line. Still in pretty good condition. The banding you see around it, holding it all together, has been stolen. Unfortunately, that is a sad fact of life with anything metal. And anything metal, even in 1902, post the end of hostilities of the Boer War and the signing of the treaty, was up for grabs for building material. Country had been decimated, farms had been destroyed, people needed building material, so they turned to any structure, certainly any military structure that was then redundant, to destroy it and use as building material. So the blockhouse you see there, the second blockhouse, is made out of corrugated iron, colloquially known in the army as wriggly tin. Okay, because it's got lines in it. So wriggly tin is the British Army terminology for corrugated iron, and it was used profusely in the building of these blockhouses. I'm going to tell you the purpose of them, but it's really a small fort. It's used to defend something against somebody. So the British used them to defend things, and I'll explain what they used them for and the purpose of them, against the Boers in a particular part of the war that was fought. So that was one of them, and they then get added together in strings, in lines. This is kind of a aerial view looking down, two blockhouses put together, approximately a mile apart. The British Army, being the British Army, they were almost absolutely 100% 1 mile to the yard apart, because some sergeant major measured it out and told them to do it a mile apart. So when you come to find one on Google Earth and you draw a line 1 mile to the east and 1 mile to the west, you can find these structures on Google Earth. And that's how I do a lot of my exploring. You do your exploring by getting on the ground. I do my exploring quite often through digital records and digital archives and digital databases. I call it kind of digital archaeology. And I started my exploration in genealogy, also a form of exploration. So I traced my family in the UK back to about, two cottages, one in Lancashire, one in Lincolnshire, back to about the 1700s. So that's my digital kind of archaeology. That's where I find a lot of my records. So you have these blockhouse lines, and they become a system, really. They are structures, they are manned by people, and they are designed to protect things, bridges, railway lines, and also being a systems engineer, I apply systems thinking to a lot of the stuff I do. So I've created the blockhouse system. It was called the blockhouse system, but there was no system diagram. So there you see a systems diagram with all the components to it. There was a human component, there were people, there were guys who guarded it. There were black guards who were members of that guard too. So each of the smaller blockhouses had about 6 soldiers and 2 or 3 black guards for night duty. The larger blockhouses between 12 and 20, and a small contingent again of night guards of natives of about 5 or 6. 56,000 men. Can't say men and women, because it wouldn't be PC and it wouldn't be correct either. So it's all men, obviously guarding the blockhouses, because the war was fought predominantly by men on the front line. There was an alarm system, there was a protection system, trenches, and these things took a while to build. About a day to get one to livable in, and about another 3 or 4 days to add all the wire and everything like that. So quite a system to put in place. When you look at my book, and if you happen to be a quantity surveyor, you'll see the list of surveying stuff in the back and how much quantity of dirt 6 soldiers had to move. A blockhouse like this, these are very similar. This is similar to the one at Lanesburg, 220 tons of stone or concrete, to make one. These ones are going to take 2 or 3 months, 3 months to build. The smaller ones, about a day to build and put a guard into, and after that, occupation would take much longer. So what were they used for? During the early parts of the war, if you know the Anglo-Boer War, the British came from the south, from the Cape Colony, into the north, and during that time, the lines of communication, clearly the railway lines at that time were the key elements that needed protecting, and the bridges were the most important thing to be connected. So the blockhouse you see here is at Beaufort West. That was taken a while ago. I don't think the roof is still on that at the moment. The first blockhouses were built in the early phase of the war, and as I say, it took about 3 or 4 months to build and cost about £800 in old money. At at the value of money in 1900. Sorry. So they protected the railway bridges. That was kind of phase one in the early parts of the war. Phase two, really after Pretoria was taken in June 1901, blockhouses then needed to protect the railway line, particularly the railway line from Pretoria to Komatipoort. The Boers instigated a tactic of attacking the railways and destroying trains at quite a good rate. They had some guys who are adept with explosives and blowing up railway lines, not at bridges, but anywhere along the railway line. So now not only did the bridges need protecting, but the whole railway line needed protecting with wire, with men, with blockhouses. So the small blockhouses you see behind me here were mass produced. Most of the stone at the bottom is veld stone, comes off the veld, you go and collect it, build a kind of bottom structure to it, and then on the top put this wriggly tin, kind of donut really, filled with shingle off the veld that is bulletproof. And that gives you a blockhouse. Put a roof on it. First roof that goes on normally is a canvas roof. Guys get inside it. The other stuff arrives. They add the roof to it and they build these. They were manufactured at about 50 a day. There were about 6 or 7 factories constructed, and this was the first. This is, if you went to IKEA, you'd be able to. IKEA makes flat pack furniture. It was flat pack, pretty much blockhouses. They were made in the factory. They were assembled or disassembled. And if you find one of these, if we get time, I'll show you one later. They are all numbered. The parts are numbered inside, and so it's quite a nice piece of 120-year-old engineering. As we got on to later phases of the war, once Pretoria was taken, according to the British, the Boers were supposed to give up, which they didn't. They didn't particularly value their capital cities, and went on commando. If you read Denny Reese's book On Commando, it tells you pretty accurately what life was like on commando. So now we have, or the British had, an enemy that was fully mobile, and everything needed protecting, all the lines of communication in the Cape Colony, because the commandos decided they would go into the Cape Colony and disrupt lines of communication in the Cape Colony and all the railway lines in the former Boer republics in the Transvaal and the Free State. So here we have other examples of blockhouses. This one is at Newport, one that kind of looks like a windmill, but isn't a windmill. And this one is actually one that was relocated and is now a bed and breakfast. Braai stands, somewhere, so you can go and have a braai in one. And I'll talk about repurposing heritage and how it survives as we get on to the presentation. And then phase 4, after all the railway lines were protected, the methodology used to capture the Boer commandos was something likened to a British estate grouse shoot. So if you cast your minds back to 1982, we were in a time where the officer class all came from the landed gentry. So they were all, a hunting, shooting, and fishing set from the estates of Britain and the countryside. And what they decided to do was create a net of blockhouses, or a system of blockhouses, in which they were literally going to drive or beat the Boer commandos into them. So what they did was set up, the railway line was already protected, like a spine, and then in between the kind of branches or lines that came out from the spine, added cross-country lines, literally from Standerton down as far south into the Free State, and made a net, and then got roving columns of hundreds or thousands of men, pretty much shoulder to shoulder, to beat or drive the Boer commandos in front of them, like grouse, into the blockhouse lines where they would all be captured. That was the theory, at least.
What actually happened was the blockhouse lines were pretty porous. You could get through them quite well. And De Wet on his commando got through blockhouse lines pretty much at will. So he would cross blockhouse lines and then double back and cross blockhouse lines again and again. The problem for the commandos was every time they crossed a line, they lost something. They lost some men, they lost some oxen, they lost something. So over a period of time, literally have been chased from pillar to post across the veld. And every time they crossed a blockhouse line, they lost some men. So that was part of the tactic that was used against the commandos. And me, in my engineering vein, decided to try and determine how effective the blockhouses have been. So if you look at the graph behind you, you can see the red line is the kind of rate of train attacks that happened on the Pretoria to Komatipoort line, and the increasingly stepped up blocks of the blockhouses. You'll see that as the blockhouses were developed, so the train attacks stopped, thus proving how effective it was during the guerrilla phase. And you can see there really the main phases of the war. At phase one, the Boer offensive. Phase two was relief and occupation. Bear in mind we had 3 sieges, so that's the relief part is the 3 sieges, and then the guerrilla phase, which was nigh on 16 months, 16, 18 months. And you can see the rate of increase of the blockhouses. So most of the text that I'd read on blockhouses said there were 8,000 blockhouses. So what I decided to do in my engineer's brain was, first thing I did was took the list where the maths had been done on and put it into a spreadsheet. And lo and behold, the maths was wrong. So 120-year-old maths, unfortunately, was wrong. So all these academics who'd been quoting the number got it wrong because they hadn't bothered to do any additional maths 120 years later. So I redid the maths, and then I recalculated all the blockhouses using primary sources. So I've got a complete database of all the blockhouse lines and did recalculations. Sorry? The blockhouse lines. Yes. Well, if you can imagine getting on a train in Cape Town and getting off in Polokwane and seeing a blockhouse every half a mile. The record said 8,000. I'm up to at least 9,500 in my calculation. So a heck of a lot, 9,500. And that's probably not all the small forts that were built in the Cape Colony to protect towns like Richmond and Montague. Montague, I've found 6 or 7 blockhouses. Richmond, there's 1 blockhouse. I went to a book fair. There's at least another 3 or 4 more. So there's plenty. And in the vein of exploration, if you want to go out and find blockhouses, there are plenty to find. And a lot of them have certainly. I'll come on to that. I'm getting distracted. So this is me trying to determine, because people say, well, how effective were these blockhouses? Well, in this particular phase of the war against the train attacks, they were pretty effective. So how effective were they in the grand scheme of the strategy that happened during the Boer War? Well, really, from day one, there was no strategy to build a blockhouse. There was no strategy to have a blockhouse line. There was no strategy to burn farms. There was no strategy to have concentration camps. There was no strategy to do drives or have armored trains. So in my book, I explain what's called nascent doctrine or doctrine on the fly, which means basically you make it up as you go along, which if you look at the war in Ukraine, it's exactly what's happening. You start with the plan, it gets you to a start line, you go across the start line, and then everybody makes it up. So it's an offense, counter-offense, defense, counter-defense type scenario. So we ended up where we were because of the choices that were made by commanders to counter each other. So this is the strategy. And if you apply this strategy today to Ukraine, you'll see pretty much exactly the same strategy. So removal of the supporting infrastructure. What did the British have to do? They had to go scorched earth destroy all the farms and ended up with concentration camps. What happened in Ukraine? They bombed the infrastructure. People ran away in millions. If you look at Bakhmut at the moment, they're fighting for nothing. There's nothing there. There's no people there. There's no infrastructure. It's exactly the same tactic. So people ask me about scorched earth and concentration camps, and it was a tactic of the time. Sad to say, it's still a tactic of the time. We still like to bomb civilians and chuck them out of their houses and kill everything around it to win a war. That's the sad fact of where we are. So removal of the supporting infrastructure was key to military strategy and winning the war. Then came, how do you capture a Boer commando? Well, you have to deny the movement, and I've explained the drives and the armored trains. Armored trains were also used. About 18 armored trains patrolled up and down the lines, and were used to reinforce the lines when these drives were happening. So in my book, I also explain how effective they were. This is a graph with a logarithmic scale. So very small increases as they go up the line here have a reasonably dramatic impact. But what it shows that over a period of about 16 months, using all the elements of the strategy there was a gradual degradation effect. No key, vital, single war-winning activity. And again, if you apply that to Ukraine, that's kind of where we're going to. It's gradual, inch by inch destruction or movement. Very similar to what happened in the Boer War, till you had a force of around 30,000 Boer commandos that had really nothing left. No ammunition, no food. The horses were pretty much gone. They were wearing rags and British Army uniforms. So a sad end to a war that was termed a gentleman's war in the early parts of the day. So why is it worth looking at? Because, as I've said previously, heritage is something we need to protect. The story that I've told now really is the first book, is The Engineer's Perspective, which is really looking at the war and setting it in a context that explains why what happened and why blockhouses were built. Because most people do drive past one at Lanesburg and have got no idea what it was for and what the purpose was for. So what I decided to do in the field guide, and this was really looking at the field guide, is list and record every blockhouse that has survived up to a certain point. And in so doing that, I wrote and published the book, and it's a one-off book. I probably won't publish again. I may put it as a digital record, but there's 400 copies of it, and a couple of them have been destroyed, and you can't visit already because of destruction in a couple of years. So in the book, it is province by province. You can see the Western Cape. There, the list of blockhouses in the Western Cape. There's a lot still surviving in the Western Cape, and survival of heritage has to do with many factors, which again I'll come onto and explain. Let me explain now how things survive in this country. If it's got metal in it, it ain't going to survive anything, pretty much, because somebody's going to come and steal it. If it's a long way away from anything, chances are something will survive. The metal will all get robbed out. If it's on somebody's private land, it probably will survive. If it's a national monument, that has nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing to do with it at all. If it's protected by the law, nothing to do with it. Law doesn't apply to heritage because it just doesn't work, or it doesn't work quick enough. And I'll give you some examples of that. So survival of heritage, if we want to preserve a blockhouse for a purpose, and you guys are explorers, so you can go exploring and finding them. A lot of them have geocaches in. Any geocaches here? One geocache. So there are blockhouses that have geocaches in, which are, geocaching is kind of treasure hunting with a GPS device, and you go and find a little plastic container and put your name in it. And it's a global activity. You can go geocaching, pretty much in any country in the world. So if you want to go exploring, it's a great way to see the country as well. Get your GPS out and go and find one of these. And there's about 20 or 30 blockhouses and forts do have geocaches in, which are all listed in the field guide. So commercialization. So dark tourism is anything to do with death and destruction or anything military, really. These days it's called dark tourism. Nice academic term to list sites like, places that we have to go and visit. Because, historians tell us that if we remember these sites, then it'll never happen again. So we have memorials at Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen, and it was never going to happen again, but it did happen again, in the Balkans War. We didn't end up with concentration camps in the Balkans War. So as human beings, we like to record history and say, well, it's great to record history because it's never going to happen again. Well, unfortunately, it does keep happening. We do keep having wars, but we do have an opportunity with dark tourism and battlefield sites to create an industry. And my kind of hobby horse about anything you want to preserve in this country is it has to create a job for somebody and an income. Otherwise, it ain't going to survive. Somebody's going to steal it and sell it for somebody else to do something with it. So this particular blockhouse at Norval's Pont was bought by one of the engineers of the Harry Dam as a ruin and turned into a 4-bedroom family home. And there's my very small son, who is now old money is about 6'3", and new money is about 1.9 meters. So as you can see, I've been doing blockhouses for quite a while. He towers above me now. He's huge. I'm 1.8 meters. He's now 1.9 meters, and a great hulking lad. But that's us having tea in a blockhouse, which has been converted into a family home, and it was very nice. And it had bathrooms in and had signs above the sink that said "Bridge." 600 meters, so you could put your rifle sight to 600 meters and shoot anybody. He preserved it quite well. It's one of the best preserved blockhouses going because it's got a purpose. Somebody owns it, it's on private land, and the guy lives in it. What my wife doesn't know is I really want to buy it. Now, this is bad news all around, Owning a blockhouse for a blockhouse, and somebody's written a book on blockhouses would be great. I mean, that's going to be real fun.
So we'll keep you secret.
Yeah, you must keep my secret. I've got a mate at the moment who is building a battlefield lodge in KZN, and he says, I think it's a good idea, Simon, because I like blockhouses like you do. If I have a honeymoon suite as a blockhouse. No, I said no. Even I said that's a bad idea. That's a really bad idea. Have a blockhouse, but maybe not as a honeymoon suite. I don't think that's going to work. So what other things can you do with blockhouses? Well, this one is one at Sturmberg. There was the Battle of Sturmberg, which happened before the blockhouse was built. But you can go and sleep in it. It's actually a bed and breakfast. It's got some water and a toilet outside it, but that is, pretty authentic, pretty dusty old place it was. Nearly died of asthma sleeping in it, me and my son, but we did have the full authentic British Tommy experience of sleeping in a blockhouse. And you can do that, and you can turn these things into something to use. The one at Lanesburg, this one at Lanesburg, one of these by the bridge, it could be a little coffee shop or something like that. It is used at the moment quite effectively by the police, who hide their speed cameras behind it and trap you all as you're going down to just as you're thinking, the Biltong. I get down and go, the Biltong in Lanesburg. Let me accelerate, and as I zip past the guy, he goes, I got you, with the speed camera. So it is getting used by the police to hide behind with their speed cameras. This is another one, Wolseley. Wolseley 1, there is a Wolseley 2. Quite often blockhouses were built in pairs. So in the winelands in the Western Cape is the kind of, forgive me for saying, but the mecca of blockhouses. So there's more blockhouses in the Western Cape than anywhere else. And this one has been taken over by the tourist office. So this is run by the tourist office. They do tours to it. It's locked. You can go and get the key and have a look and go and see what it looks like inside. This blockhouse in Warrenton, the black and white picture is in about 1990, and the ruin I took in about 2014, 2015. So completely gone. It's in the middle of habitation in Warrenton, informal settlements. It was built, to be honest, it wasn't built that well, this one. As you can see, the kind of cement in the brickwork there looks pretty red. So at the time, cement and concrete wasn't particularly available. So they built it with a lot of soil, a lot of loose soil and some cement. So that one, not surprising, it didn't last because it wasn't really kind of built to last. The ones that have been built, the ones that have lasted the best are these two. This one is at Brackport Station in the middle of the Karoo, and then this one at Merriman, two built out of concrete. I still haven't really quite got down to why they were built of concrete. They were either built as an experiment, but it took a lot of concrete to build them, or they were built because there was no stone available or no quarry. But the beauty about concrete is you can't repurpose it. It's a kind of, you know, it's a structure, and you can't chip it, you can't reuse it. It's not stone. You can take and rebuild a farmhouse.
Is this one here stone, or is it?
This one was stone, yeah, built from these.
It's veld stone.
Veld stone. Some of it was quarried. I mean, some of this, you know, the stone masonry is quite good in some of it. Yeah, they had people, skilled South Africans built. Some of the ones in the Cape colonies were built under contract. So they were built with contractors and with engineer supporters as well. This one, another one at Warrenton, as you can see, there is a monument plaque that is on this particular one. It's in a protected area. It's on a government site. It was in decay when I got there because half the wall had fallen down. And I've heard since it's gone into more decline as well. But again, not repurposed, not reused. It was a monument. I mean, the plaque had survived. Most of them that are monuments that are not on protected sites, the plaques go, you know, that's one of the first things that goes, and then the steel. A lot of the loopholes in the stone blockhouses were made out of steel, so that all those get rubbed out as well. So what can we see in South Africa? You guys as explorers, I've given presentations now to people from paleontology. I haven't done any into kind of recent stuff, but what I'm going to do is take you on a brief journey and kind of illustrate the kind of tourism opportunity we've got here, if we can weave it into some sort of fabric, or if all people can do that, and explain to you the people that have done it successfully and put South Africa on the map. So let's start with the Frontier Wars. The Frontier Wars happened in the kind of post-settler 1820, where a lot of forts were built. This is where my next book is going to be, the Frontier Forts of the Eastern Cape. That is the jail, the old jail, built in Grahamstown, turned into a campus coffee shop. So now, when I went to visit, in each one of the jail cells, I found an academic doing a PhD on something, and some wondrous PhD stories I heard from people having a coffee in a jail cell. It was perfectly preserved, but had a repurpose and had survived as something. During the festival, it's one of the prime sites of the Grahamstown Festival. If we go to the battlefields of the Zulu Wars, Anglo-Zulu Wars, two world-class battlefield sites. If you're on any television history program, at some point you're going to come across, as I did the other day, somebody telling the story of the Battle of Isandlwana and Rorke's Drift, two world-class sites. If we look to the Boer War, Magersfontein, also pristine sites. You can stand on the hilltop there, overlook it. It's got a great museum to it, world-class site. On a par with Dunkirk, Rhine crossings, Arnhem, all those sort of opportunities that exist in Europe for battlefield touring, they exist here in South Africa. The other love of my life is that South Africa's got world-class stuff and opportunities here. We just, right under our noses, we just can't see it because the lights are off some of the time. And don't forget the liberation sites. These suffer as much as anything. You might like to think that a black government is preserving black heritage better than any other. It's not. Lilliesleaf Farm and the Apartheid Museum are closed most of the time. If you want to go on a Monday or Tuesday, it's closed. You want to go to Lilliesleaf Farm, it's not operational. A lot of the trusts are not managing themselves very well, and it's not an issue with not preserving things because it's a black or a white thing. We just don't value heritage at all. So we can already weave a story from the early settlers, 1920s, up to all the liberation sites, within a couple of weeks on a tour. What I didn't quite appreciate until I kind of went to Magaliesburg and I started getting invited on people's land are some of the ancient sites that we've got. The one there that says ancient sites is a site that is termed Adam's calendar. It's probably not a calendar, but it is a monolithic stone circle. It probably did have a purpose. It's quite interesting to visit, not as kind of big as Stonehenge, but it's pretty interesting. And just to kind of illustrate the value that that heritage can have, I had when I was in the army, I had an American colleague who said to me as we were down exercising on Salisbury Plain, "Gee, Simon, I want to go see Stonehenge." I said, "Okay, I'll take you to Stonehenge. It's not far. We'll have a drive." It's, "Gee, man, I always want to see Stonehenge." Okay, so as we're driving to Stonehenge, anybody been to Stonehenge? Okay. If you've been to Stonehenge, as you're kind of driving along the highway there, as you come across the rise, you come across Stonehenge. And I said to my friend, I can't remember what it was, I call him Joe, save him from embarrassment. I said, "Hey, Joe, there's Stonehenge." And he looks at me and goes, "Gee, man, it's just a pile of rocks." And isn't that heritage? What we're looking at here is just a pile of rocks until you tell a story about a pile of rocks and how the heritage, how we came from the Stone Age, how the people who died at Isandlwana, how the people who lived on the frontier, how the people who inherited all the villages and cities, African cities that were built in this country that people just don't know about. Black or white people got no idea the extent of some of the Swana cities that are built in Mpumalanga. Huge. If you take the grass off them and cut back everything, you've got an amazing opportunity to create a fantastic village, where you can go and visit and see. And you can still pick up stuff off the veld. I walked around with somebody on the property and they picked up part of a Zulu corn grinding stone. It's just lying there in the veld. How old it was, I have no idea. But you go to the farms and they've got all the stone tools from God knows when in the farms. Oh yeah, I found this on the veld, arrowheads, and you name it, it's kind of there. We've got heritage under our feet, oozing off the belt and the hills and everything all over the place. So we've got a real story to tell. And if you didn't know it, we sit just kilometers away from what's called Cradle of Humankind. So you can tell the story, as I say, DC to daylight, year 0 to 2023, 24. Lots of blockhouses still out there. This was these two blockhouses were in an academic paper in somewhere called Mzi River. There are many Mzi Rivers in South Africa, and I haven't managed to locate these two yet. The only blockhouse I've ever found with a crawl entranceway. So again, this is a unique piece of heritage. It's sat somewhere. So there's a Mzi River towards Clarksdorp. There's a Mzi River towards KZN. If you come across the Mzi River and there's two blockhouses on, please come onto my Facebook page or give me a call and we can save them, repurpose them. Talking about saving and repurposing, these two blockhouses were found late last year. This is a gentleman who decided he was going to save them. So he wrote an article in the paper saying, I'm applying for legal protection order, and I'm going to save these blockhouses, and we're going to repurpose them. And everyone said, hurrah. And the developer said, oh, I've got a bulldozer, I'm going to bulldoze them down. And that's what they did the very next day. So they went and bulldozed them down. He was heartbroken. But they've gone. Could have been somebody's bridal suite or coffee shop somewhere, but they have completely gone. And there is one, if I can just move this. When I was down in Richmond, there is one that I found on a farm in Richmond. It was like it had been picked up by a crane like this and put down. It was so perfect. Absolutely, as it was 120 years ago, the kind of day was made.
What did they use it for?
Woodshed.
So it was a woodshed?
It was a woodshed, yeah. But perfect, absolutely perfect. How are we doing for time? Do I have time to 5 minutes? Oh, wait, what doesn't mean? Is that the power? I just need to go to the other presentation. It's got a part 2. How do I get out of this? Can I just text Lewis to say we load sheet? Can you just help me to get out of this? When is this connected? Can I pull that out? Yeah. Just get them. What of my research and what I've done at the moment? So that's a map from the field guide, and I'm now trying to, if you like, what I call join up the dots, or find out how things of interest can be added into heritage opportunities to add value. So we've got something called the Forgotten Highway, which was a settler route with a number of blockhouses in. So anywhere there's an opportunity to add a blockhouse as an interest, and the way to preserve things in this country is to get foot passage through, get people onto the site, and they then start to protect themselves because people see there's people visiting them and they don't go and rob things. So the Forgotten Highway, the N1 route, again, there's a lot of blockhouses to look. If you've got the guidebook, you can pop into and have a look at the one at Beaufort West and Ketting Station and Mzi River and understand who's talked about them. In Michalisburg, I'm looking at the opportunity, a lot of blockhouses in Michalisburg. If you guys have walked along the ridge there is a fantastic opportunity to have something called the Michalisburg Blockhouse Trail, which could be, with enough imagination, a 4-day hike, 20 Ks a day, called the Blockhouse Heritage Trail, like we have an otter trail. Well, if otters are worth preserving, maybe blockhouses are worth preserving as well. And there's a hike, 1 to 5 day hike. You can actually go all the way from Rustenburg to Pretoria. Then it's quite a challenge, quite a long way. 180 to 100 Ks, hiking, blockhouse, ruins, fords, mule paths, battlefield tours, geology, flora, fauna, join the dots in the biosphere. And my philosophy on heritage and battlefield stuff is it has to be short and relatively bite-sized, and there has to be good food and good alcohol at the end of it. And once you do that, that's the way you save things and make things interesting to people. The old, 5-day battlefield tour can get a little bit tedious after a while. I've done some of the ones the World War I sites. Gets quite mind-numbingly soul-destroying once you visited another set of graves with 20,000 people who are buried there and stuff like that. So stuff has to be, especially in the era we're living in, scrolling through stuff, and it has to be relatively bite-sized. But we have the opportunity we can geotag these sites, we can barcode sites, we can do self-tourism. You go and wherever you found, scan a QR code and get the history of it. That's one of my plans for blockhouses in the country, is to tag them all with a QR code, link them to a website, and you guys can go and use my guidebook and find out other interesting stuff. So that was the blockhouse line that went from all the way from Rustenburg all the way to Pretoria, and that's the kind of Mcallisburg bit I've just showed you there. Lots of other maps. I'm looking at a lot of original maps in war diaries at the moment. Those are, again, from Rustenburg going down here. It's the original map. And then if you go to what I call the Ordnance Survey map, the 1 to 50,000 map, you will find there is an old fort and an old fort. I haven't visited these two yet. So again, stuff I can kind of go and explore. So this was a blockhouse that was somewhere in the Free State. The farmer said, I didn't want it. Get that something thing off my land. Good old poor farmer didn't want anything British on his land. So somebody in Mcallisburg said, well, I'll drive down and I'll take it off you. So he drove down, dismantled it, put it on a trailer, took it back to Mcallisburg, and is going to reassemble it at the Battle of Polcable battlefield site, which is just opposite the Lion Park. And he has an original site there where he's going to make a museum, repurpose this blockhouse, put it on his land, and he also owns a restaurant. So, hey, you can go and do a battlefield. You can visit the Lion Park, which he's going to package things. It's going to be a day package now. Do the Lion Park in the morning, a couple of hours. You go and do the Battle of Corcable with somebody, so a local guide, and you go and visit his thing, and you have food and a gin and tonic. So it works for me. There's plenty of other sites as well. So what I'm doing at the moment, taking original maps. Sorry, you can't see that very well, but an original map with all the blockhouses and the defensive lines on. And if you plot that on Google Earth, you can put everything back into a perspective where it was. I've done this with a number of sites. So this is right at the kind of nitty-gritty level. Barberton, there was a list of blockhouses made. This is the original engineer records from Barberton. If you take that, take the original photographs, you can put them back into the landscape and form the entire defensive plan of Barberton and have the Barberton blockhouse trail and go and walk the hills and find out where the blockhouses were. My vision for the future is you then take your cell phone and go, oh, there's a blockhouse here, and hold your cell phone up, and in augmented reality, you see the blockhouse from 120 years ago. Wouldn't that be cool? Technology and all that stuff coming together to repurpose sites that have got no value into something we can use to earn jobs. And you've seen that already. That really concludes the presentation. I do have my books here. They are on sale if you'd like to buy them. The engineer's perspective is 400 rand and the field guide is 500 rand. If you want them both as a package, then there's a special offer. But for me, this has just been really, it started with one blockhouse and looking at that in a getaway magazine and really opened up a world of looking at through a different lens, really, and how we can preserve bits of heritage as we go. And I think it's about finding new stuff and bringing it kind of up to date. So I joined it. I also took notes about how these guys run at AGM. I've got to run at AGM an hour and a quarter, and that's a real also a real fight to get people to volunteer as well. So every association depends on on its members to kind of do stuff, and the strength of either a body stress release association or an exploration society is on you guys and how much you're prepared to put in. So thank you for listening to me tonight. I hope I've woven a story of the blockhouses and told you a little bit about how they came into existence, what they were used for, and how they may or may not survive the next few years. Thanks very much.
Thunder to add to the applause. I think
that's the British shooting.
Indeed.
One of the ones I found in Mcallisburg, somebody said, I went to a battlefield. We overlooked the battlefield. Oh, I think there's a blockhouse over there. So I went to have a look, and I found one of the lightning strap. So what they used to do with blockhouses was make a lightning strap. You attach it to the roof and then put it to earth, and hopefully, you know, when the lightning comes and that blockhouse gets hit by lightning, you don't die. If you look at the British records, there's the people who died in action compared with the people who died of disease is almost, I think, comparable. More people that died of, or about the same people died of cholera and dysentery and whatever than died in fighting. But there were 2 oaks who died. One got eaten by a crocodile in the river, and somebody did get struck by lightning at some point along the way. So.
That's a pretty good record.
Sorry? Probably, yeah. Yeah. There is a nice story in the book of the guy who went out to a call of nature in the middle of the night, went out and kind of did his business. As he came back, forgot the password, and his mate shot him, and he sadly died. And there's, you know, ways English is written in those days. It's a very gentlemanly story told of him. You know, his guy is bleeding out there and bleeding to death, and he said, "It's okay, mate. I don't blame you. It was my fault," were his last words. And all this is written quite nicely. And the officer said, "He was a really nice chap," and everything. So a little story about blockhouse lines and what happened during that particular period.
Guys, any questions? Let's take 3 or 4 questions. And
did the British build blockhouses in other countries?
They did, certainly. The origins of the blockhouse come from the Martello Towers. So Martello Towers were originally built to protect the coastal lines, and there are 2 Martello Towers in South Africa, one in Fort Beaufort, the other one in Simonstown. There were 2 in Simonstown, but one was destroyed. So the Northwest Frontier, they were all kind of built prior to the Boer War. There were blockhouses built in Cuba during the Cuba conflict. We get to the 1914, a lot of these rice pattern, these small Wrigley tin blockhouses were built identically 15 years later. When we get to the World Wars, they really became kind of pillboxes, not blockhouses. And, you know, there was things like the Maginot Line and the coastal defences that the Germans built to protect France. And so, yeah, there's a history of, you know, them being built. Not so much today with kind of modern warfare. When you can, go into drone warfare and things.
I imagine that the Brits would have built a lot of those blockhouses in their colonies in Africa and Asia and wherever they were, because it kind of fitted the landscape.
It did. If you look at Martello Towers, they were built a lot all over the kind of the empire footprint. So from the kind of Caribbean, there were kind of naval forts and structures. But I mean, the Dutch, you know, if you look at Cape of Good Hope, built by the Dutch, the French were also, you know, prolific fort builders. So there's kind of history of that. Now we're into bunkers. You know, we need to get underground these days and not above ground so much. Defensive structures will kind of always be needed. And repurposed. There's a lot of World War II stuff and Cold War stuff in the UK now getting repurposed. You go and buy a nuclear bunker and go and live underground with, you know, heating and lighting and everything like that.
So guys, I think you're still online, but we were off. Just that question was, did the British use the blockhouses in other colonies? Okay, Piers, did you have a question? No. Anybody else question? Yep. Mana.
Thank you for interesting talk.
Okay, I'll get
Did you manage by any chance to track down some of the descendants of soldiers who were based in those blockhouses?
So just a quick one. Just for the guys online, Mana was asking, did you meet any of the descendants of the people that lived in the blockhouses?
No, but what board soldiers do on guard duty is carve their names quite often into a blockhouse. So one of my interests is to find out where humans touch the landscape and leave a mark behind. So particularly in the sandstone blockhouses that were built in Harrismith, If you go to the Harrismith blockhouse, it's full of graffiti and soldiers and their cap badges and their regimental numbers. So in the field guide, I certainly tie individuals. My aim was always to get a photograph of somebody. I didn't quite manage to get that far because it's like going down a rabbit hole. Quite often you have to draw the line. Someone had to draw the line. But not directly, but it's still kind of still part of my thought to do that. Some of the blockhouses in Harrismith were also used post Boer War, were used in the rebellion 1914, were used in exercises and commando stuff that went on into the kind of after World War II. So you find modern day graffiti in there as well, not Baslov, Shaz and hearts and stuff like that. You find quite a lot of that stuff, but you do find a lot of regimental numbers and guys' names and things like that.
Okay, let's do one more.
The
The question was just, are these buildings not protected?
They are protected. If you just take the bylaws in Johannesburg say that any house over 60 years is supposed to get planning permission. Nobody cares. No, you can turn any bungalow into as they've done next door to me in Kensington. You can turn any bungalow into a 8-room, 8-door dwelling. Nobody cares. You can go to they're not interested. So why would they be interested in something that's 120 years old? It's got no purpose.
So I say, if it's got no value and no purpose, nobody will care about it. But if you create an income and a job and a life from it, people will start to care. So we've got rules and we've got laws that protect them, but they're not effective. That guy who tried to save those 2 blockhouses in Polokwane, his mistake was he published it in the paper and said, I'm going to protect these. And the developers went with the bulldozer, well, I don't care. You can't do anything anyway, so I just demolished them. But even if they've come with a court order, it may still not have happened. Because the authorities don't want to, enforce stuff that they kind of see no reason for.
All right, guys.